Servus and welcome to another episode of the Pro Hockey Pod, episode 57. For those watching on YouTube, you'll notice I'm back in Germany. Got the old background here. Got back about a week ago recording this. It's July 21st right now. I got back about a week ago from Canada. Had some good time being home, seeing family, seeing friends, and now it's get back into it. Season starting soon in Mannheim, so we're just slowly getting the guys in here and getting ready for training camp. But trying to get back on the regularness here of having a weekly episode. This week, another fellow goalie on the podcast. Very excited to have him. A guy that kind of had kind of a career like I would say myself, battled through a lot of adversity, both in North America and then over in Europe. And now, kind of like myself, has ventured off into the goalie coaching world in professional hockey in Europe. He's been in Germany the past couple of years. I think we've crossed path a couple times in the hallway, but never actually fully said something to each other. But I feel like we knew we were both North American. But happy to finally meet him, have him on the podcast, and now we'll be able to talk in person. Welcome to the podcast, Josh Robinson.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And to that point, I'll just the one time I did recognize you and I never said something was in Bietigheim 2 years ago. You were there scouting a game, I believe, and you sat like two rows behind, two rows down from me up top. And then I was tagging the whole game the whole time. I know who this person is, but we had never met before, so I never said hi.
You can just honestly, like us as North Americans, we can just see when someone's North American, like by how maybe they dress or like their style. And like I saw you coming up in your suit, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's a North American. And then like I thought about it, and then I saw what you were doing, and then Bryce had told me that you were working there, and I was like, oh, that's probably Josh Robinson. Like I've never met him, but anyway, so that's funny. But yeah, man, appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast. I always like to just kind of start off with kind of your childhood. Like, what's your earliest memory from your childhood? Like, whether it was, you know, falling in love with the game of hockey or just kind of growing up. I believe you were born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So, what's kind of the earliest memory of growing up there?
Yeah, so born in Milwaukee. My dad was in residency at the time, so he actually just retired now. He is an eye surgeon, ophthalmologist. But then I think I was around 3 or 4. We moved to Michigan, back closer to where my dad grew up, and we ended up settling in Frankenmuth, Michigan, which is actually a German little tourist town. So now being in Germany, it's really interesting because I grew up seeing obviously not the real history, but kind of a fake touristy. And it's pretty famous around, Michigan and the US. There's so many people. It's like, oh, you're actually from there. So it's kind of one of those places that everyone goes to visit, but you never really meet that many people who grew up there. But the the buildings and some of the history and all that I kind of grew up with, and now being in Germany and seeing the real side of it, it's really cool. And there is a sister city. I have to find out it's somewhere in Bavaria for Frankenmuth. But we had quite a few exchange students going back and forth. So really grew up in Michigan. And I think I was just lucky because I'm born in 1989. So right around that time when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, the Detroit Red Wings kind of entered that big Stanley Cup window. So I believe I was in like around 6 years old, and I think they lost in the Cup finals. Then the next year they won back, or the next 2 years they won back to back. So that really got me into it. And my dad always tells me that I watched Chris Osgood win the Stanley Cup, and I just told him, like, I want to be a goalie. And at the time, I had never even skated before, and my none of my family has ever really played hockey. I don't know if my parents can even skate. So they just kind of took me and said, "Hey, if you want to play hockey, that's great." There was a rink that opened up in Birch Run, Michigan, which is about 15 minutes away. It only lasted probably 3 or 4 years and went out of business, but they signed me up for learn to skate, and I kind of just always was determined to play goalie, and went through a couple seasons of like playing D and playing out, and I was always like, no, I want to be a goalie. This is what I want to do. I really remember thinking that my goalie at the time, one of those seasons was terrible, and I can do a better job. Like, let me play goalie. And then finally, they let me play goalie around 8, 8.5, and here I am today.
It's always funny hearing everyone's story of how they got involved with hockey, or like yourself, for example, with goalie. Um, I was the same way, like always fascinated by the position. And then my parents made a rule you can't switch until you're 10. And if you want to switch, then you can switch, blah, blah, blah. But Chris Osgood, quite a guy to look up to. I mean, probably one of the ugliest styles out there, but he had success, found a way to get it done. Next question would have to be when you started playing goalie, did you rock one of those like player helmet things, kind of like he did?
No, not at first. I know I have pictures, some around like 10. I did end up having one for a short time, but I don't know if it was my parents or other coaches or someone they convinced me to get something else pretty quick. So there's only a couple pictures of having one of those.
It's a rare photo. If anyone finds one, that could be worth a lot of money. Man, that those helmets, I don't even know how they wore them. Like, I feel like it wouldn't protect you, but that's just my
No,
opinion.
I can still remember, and I'm sure if you go on YouTube, like a slap shot from basically the blue line cutting Ozzy open across his forehead. And
Hmm.
it's like, how does the team? I don't think a team today would ever let something like that happen because you're losing your goalie for a certain amount of time for stitches and possible concussions just from a normal shot.
Oh yeah. No, it'd be a lot different than back then. One thing we talked about off camera, which I didn't know, and I think it's good that you brought it up, was kind of like your minor hockey path. I like to talk to guys about this. So online it says like, you played the last time you played minor hockey, you played AAA for the Sioux Indians there, but you brought it to my attention that, basically your whole life until those 6 games, whenever you were there, 16 years old or whatever, you played double A. So do you want to just kind of talk about that, like kind of grinding your way through as a young kid, not playing the highest level and like kind of how it helped you maybe like kind of be ready to make jump to other levels that you did so quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, growing up in Frankenmuth, this is about an hour and a half north of Detroit. So you have all the Honey Bakes and Little Caesars and CompuWares and all those teams around the Detroit, Chicago, Pittsburgh area. I don't know exactly when the Sioux Indians AAA program started up there, but again, that was probably 6 to 7 hours north of me. So really, my only options was A and Double A hockey when I first started out. So that was in Birch Run for a couple of years. Then that rink closed. We went to Saginaw, which is about 20-25 minutes away. And the Spirit didn't even come into the OHL until I was probably late middle school. So I had no idea what major junior hockey was. I understood because my mom went to Michigan State that, college hockey in Michigan State, that's really cool. But in my mind, I was just playing hockey and I was hoping that I could eventually go play college hockey and play in the NHL. It's out there, but I had no like path like, oh, I'm going to play AAA here. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go play juniors. I didn't know the USHL existed until later on. It was just, I'm going to play hockey. I'm going to have fun. And then I'm going to go play college hockey and play in the NHL. But yeah, so I played in, 3 different spots. It's kind of the Tri-Cities there. It's Saginaw, Bay City, Midland. Um, Really, I was okay. I never tried out for a AAA team. My parents never drove me down to Detroit. We went to Toronto every summer to John Elkins goalie school for 1 or 2 weeks to get some, training in the summertime. And it's funny that you laugh. So maybe you went there too, but there's so many guys that I run into. Anthony Peters is down here as the assistant coach in Florida, and he was an Elkins guy. It's just a million guys have gone through those schools, and I loved them every summer. But that was it. There was no, nowadays there's goalie coaching everywhere. I had no goalie coaching. We had a state police officer as a head coach, and his son was on the team, and he was a great guy. But even hockey knowledge from in terms of the team is he was dad. He loved the game of hockey, but that was what we had, and we had fun, and we ended up winning a state, double A championship. I think my first year of midgets. Played one more year there, and then finally it got to the point where out of nowhere I was drafted to the Sioux Greyhounds. They had watched me actually at the state tournament, which was up north somewhere. Like I think it might have been in Gaylord, Michigan. So kind of up by the Mackinac Bridge type area, northern of the Lower Peninsula. They came and watched me. Myself and one other player on that team got drafted into the OHL, and then it kind of became to the point. It's like, oh, I don't necessarily want to go to the OHL, and obviously I never did, but now I need to figure out how can I go play at a higher level in order to go play where I want to go.
Yeah, I mean, A lot to dive in there. Like obviously the Elkin thing, like I feel like everybody growing up, if you were a goalie in North America, or at least in Ontario, you had been to a school once. I went there for so many years. I remember that guy used to have four pads going at the same time with two different groups. Like he was just raking in the money. But like you mentioned, like Anthony Pierce, that so his brother and him went there. Anthony's my age, so I used to train with him a little bit. He's another great story, like kind of what he's been through, and like you know didn't really stick in the OHL in terms of like ever solidify himself as a number one, and then look at where he ended up going. Playing AHL games, all that, like having a good career in Europe. Happy that he's doing goalie coaching now down there in Florida. That's good for him. But yeah, that's cool. If you ever want to learn how to play, that was always one of the ones you go to. And then funny you brought up the draft because I was going to ask you like if you had ever thought about it, but you kind of answered it there. I mean, being a 14th rounder, it's, you know, I would say it comes on your radar then, but it's still like, it's a long shot and maybe school is more your route. But how did the how did the Sioux City Musketeers kind of come up? And it's actually funny seeing that on your resume because you played there, I believe, a couple seasons. And the year that you left, the next year, I was actually supposed to go there. And then I ended up not going because I didn't want to leave home at the time because I had already committed to school and they knew someone there. So they were like, oh, you should go play in this league instead. And just looking at it now, I was like, oh, I could have been there after Robinson. But it's probably good I didn't because I wouldn't have been able to fill your shoes there. But talk about that opportunity there.
Yeah, and it all came about because of the USA Select 17 Festival. So I don't know how familiar you are with the this US model they've kind of put in place, and until you reach your 15s year, they just kind of have like the regional tournaments. But you have in Michigan, we had I think it was 8 sections in Michigan. So I was in that Tri-City area section, and then they took whatever it was, maybe one or two goalies out of this section to the all Michigan camp. And then from the all Michigan camp, one or two goalies would make it to the national camp. And they have those regionals all throughout the US. And down here in Florida, we have the Southeast, which is bigger. It has Georgia, South Carolina. It's a little bit, larger than just Florida. But again, it starts at just our rink with the South Florida kids, and then they go on to Charlotte, North Carolina. I think is the like the sectional camp, and then to Buffalo for the main camp. But I never made it out of my section until my 17s year. So that's under 17. So I was 16 years old. I had just played my second year of U16 midgets, and I finally made it out of my little regional section, made it to the Michigan camp. And for whatever reason, and luck had it, is I allowed one goal the entire Michigan camp. And really, I went into that camp with no expectations other than trying to show that I could play well, and ended up playing really well. And then myself and Jeremy Smith, who's had an amazing career again, went on to the national camp. And that's really for all the schools and USHL teams. That was the first time they ever saw me, was at that, the Michigan camp for the few people that was there. And then the Select 17 camp out at the time I was in St. Cloud. They got to see me play. I played well. Ended up talking to a couple schools out of that. The first one was actually my coach for the team is Northeastern. They ended up talking to me. They ended up committing Chris Rawlings, another great guy. I don't know if you know that name at all.
Played against
He
him.
ended up committing. Yeah, he ended up committing pretty early there, so that never ended up resulting in an offer or anything. But that was the first time I'm like, oh wow, this is cool. I'm actually speaking to college teams. I have shown and kind of proved to myself I always wanted to make it, but I realized that, hey, I'm actually good enough to play with some of these guys. And then out of that camp, I signed with the Sioux Indians, the AAA team, and 6 hours away from home, AAA hockey in the same division as all the Detroit powerhouses. There was a team in Marquette up in the UP with us. There was the Madison teams. There was Green Bay. So kind of that whole region up there of teams. And I knew we were an okay team, but it would allow me to play a lot of games, be facing all the top guys. And my hope was to continue showing myself and, progressing towards my goal at that time was like, okay, I hope I can make a North American League team and see if I can get into college now. it was like even the USHL is like, I don't know, maybe I can play there. I don't know yet. And part of that is, you know, coming from double A hockey, you didn't necessarily have that belief that you could go play in USHL yet. But then out of that camp, they had their futures draft at the time, beginning of the season. So I played 4 games to start the season. Got a call that I had been drafted in the first round by Sioux City, and that they wanted to bring me in right away because they weren't happy with one of their goaltenders. So played another couple weekends, and then they got the call to me and my parents that we needed to drive out to Sioux City, that they were going to bring me in and keep me for the rest of the season. So it ended up being myself and Jerry Kuhn, another guy who's been around Germany now a long time and had a great career. And he was a 20-year-old and I was a 16-year-old. And after 6 games in AAA, I was playing in the USHL.
Crazy. I don't even know what you want to say there. Like 6 month span. Like that's insane. Quickly speaking about Jerry Kuhn, he's actually supposed to be the next guest on this podcast. I've been
Oh,
trying to
perfect.
set it up with him, so hopefully we can set it up now that we're both back in Germany. But yeah, man, like I think there you brought up a really good point of like even when you made the jump to AAA finally, like you went to a team where they might have not been the best, but you knew you were going to get a lot of playing time and probably get a lot of work, which obviously goes into your development, but also would allow you to showcase yourself, because it's obviously there's a lot of times in hockey where goalies play on really good teams and they might get 20 shots a night and they get selected for something. And then when they go to the next team and they don't have that same support, they might not succeed as much because they've been so used to something else, where yourself had been on the other spectrum. So you had proved, hey, I can handle the workload. I can take a lot of shots. I can play on this team. Like I'm ready to go. This is my talent, which obviously Sioux City saw in you. How was that adjustment to the USHL? Obviously, as I said, in the whatever it was, 6, 12 month span, you'd gone from playing double A to playing probably in the best junior league, tier two junior league there is in North America.
Yeah, I felt for myself that was the hardest jump to make. I remember after my first day in practice, even, coming from AAA for the last couple months, he had been there for a while, so I had made that adjustment, but still as the guys could all skate, they could all shoot. It just felt like the game was moving 100 miles per hour around me. And, you know, I think the team did a really good job of. I don't think they started me for about 3 weeks. Jerry Kuhn played a lot of games, and he had been used to that, but they gave me that time to adjust. And especially after watching me that first day, they could have been like, "Oh no, we might have made a mistake here," but they gave me time to adjust and figure it out. And I guess for me, the biggest thing, and now I take it in my coaching, is I've just always tried to outwork people and have that mental resolve that no, I can do this. And whatever I decide to do, I'm going to find a way to will myself there. Because again, I have never been a top end prospect. I've just tried to scratch and claw, and whatever I set my mind to, I'm just going to try to figure out a way and get myself there. So I figured it out and ended up winning my first game. And as you know, in the game of hockey, especially when you reach the junior and college and pro level, is when you win games, you get another chance to play again. And that's what I just try to do. Is every time I got in there, I try to win.
Man, I have a lot of respect for people like you that like are pretty honest about like what their mindset was. Um, like me, looking back on my career, like I was very talented, but I didn't put in the work because like I'd gotten away on talent for so long, whether it was in minor hockey and then junior, like I'd gotten away with it. And that when I went to college, I was a big smack in the face that like, you actually have to work hard to get better, like kind of thing. And I it took me too long to kind of understand that. But like yourself, like you just talking about like you wanted to be the hardest worker, you wanted to prove that you could play at every level and also just like every day giving it your all. Like I try to tell like the young listeners out there, like at the end of the day, you can be very talented at something, but if you're not going to work hard at it, it's only going to get you so far. Like whatever the saying is, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't want to work hard, like whatever, some form of that. But it's so true. Was that kind of like instilled at you at like a young age by like maybe your parents, like to always have that hardworking effort?
Yeah, and what I love, and especially now, like I'm a little bit out of the youth hockey realm now because I'm over in Germany and just coaching the pros, and obviously I have the little bit of a role, with the junior guys and developing those guys. But when I was down here in Florida with the Everblades, I was heavily involved with lessons and doing all that. But I think so much of it just comes on the kid is, do they want it? It's not if the parents push them or sign them up for a million camps, that doesn't mean they're going to make it. Is, does the kid have that resolve to keep pushing, because they are going to be cut. They are going to have games where they allow 10 goals. They're going to have bad games. They're going to have good games. All of the million lessons that all of us learn throughout our career is, do they have the ability when adversity hits to keep going, or at a certain point will they shut down? Some kids it's 14 years old. Some kids it's 21 when they don't end up making a junior team or don't get selected to college. Some guys it's year one of pro when they get released or traded a couple times. You never know, and every single guy's sticking points at a certain time. But I find the guys that didn't necessarily have the easiest path coming up have that mental resolve to stick with it longer, versus the guy who was always the best player, made every team, everything came easy. And all of a sudden you reach junior hockey or college hockey, you're like, oh man, I'm not the starter. Or you get pulled and all of a sudden you're on the bench for a while. With all the different scenarios is, sometimes going through it early, those kids find a way to make it because they want it more, versus the kid who just, it's easy, I like this, but then all of a sudden you get that slap in the face, and what do you do?
Hmm. No, that's so true. Yeah, it's good. It's good too that like, we're both kind of relaying that message now. As you said, like you might not be so involved with the youth over in Germany, but like you had experience back in North America. Me, like I try to do it through this podcast, but it's, yeah, like you're gonna face adversity at some point in your career, maybe multiple times. And at the end of the day, it's that drive. If you have it, the work ethic, the grind, that's what's gonna get you through it. And obviously the positiveness, staying positive. But kind of back to your career here. So then, after you play there in the USHL, you obviously get a D1 scholarship, which is a tremendous achievement for anyone to go to any school. But you end up picking Michigan Tech, and I'm just curious, like, how did you kind of make that decision, and how was the transition for you first going to college? Because we both went to college at the same age. Just obviously, I'm a year younger than you, so like we both went at 19, like we just turned 19, or we're turning 19. So I'm curious for like goalies, like they always say, it's better to go older. Like if you go at 20, 21, was that better? Like when I look back on my career, I'm like, I wasn't ready to go when I went. And that's kind of part of what I was talking about with the work ethic and understanding what, being a pro was, because that's what they try to teach you at that level as well, as like juggling school and hockey. But yeah, so how did you end up picking Michigan Tech? And then how was the adjustment for you in that first year?
It, the Again, it was a little bit like the Sioux Indians, where the league, you're playing against the WCHA at the time, which had Colorado College, North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin. I wanted to go play against the best teams, and I had a couple options. It came down to Michigan Tech or a couple of ECAC schools, and so really it was playing time. I went in as a freshman with a senior, so I knew that the first season I was probably going to split time, but then I had the opportunity to be the guy for 3 years, and then I was going to play against the best players. And I think a little bit of it, when I went on my visit to Michigan Tech, it was by far my favorite experience and my favorite place. It's a little town up in the UP of Michigan. It felt like home. There's a lot of winter up there. I think my junior year it snowed 300 plus inches. So you have to realize that it's going to be a little bit of a unique experience up there in terms of the weather, but that makes so many of the players and guys who go to these schools a little bit closer. And we still have a group chat with a bunch of the hockey guys from my year and a couple of years before and after that still lives right now. And every day you wake up and it's like, oh, that's something random pops up in there. You never know what's going to show up in there at times. But um it the whole package, and I just felt like when I went there, the playing time, the league, everything just made sense, and that it was an easy decision for me. Really, it was just like this felt like the right decision, and I went there. And my freshman year went well. I ended up playing more than I thought. I ended up doing pretty well, and then reality kind of set in for the next 2 years that I wasn't ready, like you said. And and I should clarify because it's something that I wish I was better at, is I went into like the USHL so raw that I had a great on ice work ethic, but I never figured out the off ice part until towards the end of my college career and then much more in pro. So I was never in bad shape, but when I got to USHL, some of these guys like Max Pacioretty was on my USHL team my first year, and he had been working with Ben Prentice out in Connecticut for a bunch of years, and he looked like a pro hockey player already at whatever 17, 18 years old. And then I was there, had never touched a weight in my life. I wasn't in the best shape off the ice, but I just found a way that I'm gonna outwork you on the ice and figure out what I need to do. But then it took a while once you got into that college strength program that you finally start figuring it out. And then finally into my pro career, I figured out the off ice side a lot more. But it was really just kind of that on ice side that was my work ethic and my drive.
Been there, man. I like kind of like funny you mentioned that. Like I went to the gym for years, like whether it was Twist or whatever, like all these companies. And for me, like we had a good workout group, like a lot of guys that went and played pro and like at the time were playing OHL, and then we had an older group who were playing pro. But like for me, it was more like just go to say you did something, like say you went to the gym today kind of thing versus like actually trying to get stronger. Like I probably didn't push myself at a young age like I should have, but that's funny. I noticed too kind of about your college career there, and obviously talking to Bryce, who is a good buddy of mine. Like it it seemed like, you talk about, that maybe that second, third year you were still like trying to figure out like how to be we'll say a pro athlete, but like or becoming a pro athlete, I'll say. But also I feel like you at that school, like you guys kind of were in a tough division where you had to battle for everything. Cause like I noticed just by looking at your like junior year, like you had one win and whatever 16 starts, if that's true or not. So it seems like the team itself might have been going through like a transition period or like kind of finding their identity, or which happens in college hockey, plus playing in a tough division. So it kind of goes back to what we talked about with like playing on those like not the best teams, but getting a lot of work. Like obviously you were still, you know, stats are whatever, but like if you have one win on the season, you still have an 88 save percentage. I mean, I've been there, so I can say like it's not as bad as it looks on paper. Like you're actually doing a lot more good. But do you think that kind of helped you like maybe mold yourself or kind of, I don't know how to say this, like get ready for kind of your senior year there, which ends up being like a very important year for a lot of players?
Yes. It's hard mentally. Like the feeling. You go through, and I had 6 or 7 wins. You can go count it, and the lead prospect numbers are 100% true. Is I had 6 or 7 wins going into my senior year, not just in one season, just in 3 years up there. I had won 7 games, and that takes a toll on you. And truly, we had a coaching change. Mel Pearson came in to Michigan Tech for my senior year, and prior to that change, I had actually even just debated in my mind if I wanted to look into transferring and going to go play Division 3 and go play a lot. Because you never know with the coaching change, and things had gone so poorly for a few years there that you have those doubts, and you never know what will happen when a new coach comes in, if they bring in a new goaltender or transfer guy. Or this is before the portal, so the portal has totally changed the whole landscape of hockey now. But yeah, no, I even debated that in my mind, and then I again, I'm glad I decided this, but I'm like, nope, I'm gonna go work as hard as I possibly can this summer to get ready. And that was actually a crucial point, because I emailed Mike Valley, who has now become probably the biggest hockey mentor in my life. Tried to come work with him that summer, and I did. I went to Madison that summer, and basically he, as a coach, is very, very good technically, but he has this mental superpower. And he has the ability to, the way he talks to you, the way, he is just on and off the ice, is he can make you feel like you're the best goalie in the world. And like, he obviously coached in the NHL a long time. He decided to get out because he was having some health issues. And even now is like, talking to him, is he has such a great perspective on the world. And I've learned so much on and off the ice from him. But that now I guess has transferred into partially the way I coach, which we'll obviously get into. But I just went into that season with the belief that I have the game to play at this level. I knew that every start was going to be, make or break for me. And luckily enough, Steve Shields became our goalie coach that season. So Shieldsy is a character. I believe he had just retired from playing a couple years before. He didn't really know what he was going to kind of be doing. And Mel Pearson had him at Michigan as a player, brought him up to Michigan Tech, and he and I hit it off really well. And just that combination of finally having a voice. Shieldsy hadn't figured out necessarily how to coach the technical side yet, but again, he was great mentally, and that's really what I needed at that point. And things clicked, and I ended up playing all but I think 2 or 3 games that year, and it allowed me to sign a pro contract the year after.
Which is crazy because, like, again, if you just look at where we were, how many years before, like, to where you're getting to at this time in your life and signing a pro contract. I noticed you ended up signing with Dallas's organization there. Sorry. I also noticed that Mike Valley was working for them at the time. Like, was that kind of like a connection that you had made? And
It,
then he had,
there was two connections. It was Valley from training with him and getting to know him, and then Scott White, who is one of the assistant GMs for Dallas, and he is a Michigan Tech grad. So for a long time, he usually signs one of the better, or probably one of the best seniors from Michigan Tech. He gives them an American League deal with Texas and Idaho.
mhm.
And I had a great senior year. I basically did everything I possibly could. I think we had 17, 18 wins. We went to the final 5 and lost in the first game to Denver for the first time for the WCHA. And they called me like pretty quick. It probably was right around the end of playoff time. And they offered me a 1-year AHL 2-way contract and said I'd be in Idaho. So it was the opportunity that I needed. It was a pro contract. I would get to go. It was actually ended up being the lockout year. So I never even ended up going to NHL camp. Just went right to American League camp and went down to Idaho, played, I don't remember, it was 38, 39 games my first year. And again, it's kind of been the story is I didn't play the first 5 games of the season in Idaho. Tyler Beskorowany was on the third year of his entry level, very, very talented goaltender who now has had a great second half of his career. But I know he would probably tell you again is he wishes he would have worked harder and had that drive early in his career because he had the size, the ability, so naturally talented, but he didn't have the work ethic until later in his pro career. But he could have been an NHL goalie easily. He was really, really good. Um, I ended up outplaying him the first half of the season. There was when the NHL restarted, I think they had an injury to someone and Besco went up and I had the ability. I ended up playing 14, 15 games in a row down the stretch. And then I ended up being the guy in playoffs. So really it was just wait for my opportunity. I won my first start. Brad Ralph was the coach who's actually now the coach down here in Florida. And I just earned his trust because him and I have talked about this. And he even told me, he's like, day one, he watched me. He's like, I didn't think he'd play. And so literally it was every single time I got in there, I won and he played me again. And the first weekend he played me, we lost on Wednesday. So I got the Friday game in Colorado. So I don't know if anyone on this call has ever watched a Colorado Eagles game. Now they're in the AHL. They were in the CHL and they're in the AHL now. They were in the CHL, then the ECHL. That building is very, very hard to play in. They can score in waves. They always have. It's just the way that is. And I won on Friday, and then he put me in on Saturday, won again. And then I got the start the next weekend. And that's just really what I've always just tried to do is find a way to win and play again. And it just kind of rolled from there. And I had a really good, first year.
That's probably the most accurate way to be as an undrafted goalie playing, whether it's ECHL or AHL, I would say, because as you know, like in the hierarchy charts, like Besker's on his third year of his entry level. So like he's gonna get the net first or like the sniffs first because they want their prospect to play, develop, whatever. And kind of like you just said, like whenever I go in, just be ready. And at the end of the day, you win, you'll probably go back in, which you obviously did a lot of that year. And then obviously with Beskarwani going up too, that probably helped you getting the net was more yours. Like you didn't really have to share it as much. I remember him from the OHL days, freaking tall goalie. And like you said, like he disappeared for whatever it was a year or two and then came like didn't play and then came back and his second half has been great. Colorado, funny story that you brought that up. I went to two ECHL camps in my life. The first one was Rapid City, and the exhibition game that I had to play was get on the bus to go to Colorado. Exhibition game. It's sold out. It is so loud in there. I actually played really, really well. We lost with 1 second left in overtime, which hurt for me. But I just like kind of what you were saying. Like, you know, when they get on you quick, hard, and they can score in waves. Look like a sick place. I'm happy they've moved up to the AHL now. I think that's a great level for them. But I wanted to talk to you like what I just kind of brought up with the hierarchy thing. So being an undrafted goalie, I know you said you signed that 1 year and then assuming you re-signed again because you end up staying in the same organization, but you started doing the what I like to call is the call up grind as a goalie because you're going up here this week. No, actually you're going back down here. You're going up here, blah, blah, blah. Like, and that can be really tough on you, like obviously physically, but I think mentally is where it like kicks in for these goalies who like are undrafted and like maybe um the leash isn't as long where it would be with prospects. Like, can you just talk about kind of like the grind that you did there, whether when it was going up and down between whether it's the ECHL, the Central Hockey League at times to the AHL, like kind of that grind as like an undrafted goalie?
Yeah, and that season I went up twice. And so which actually to me was the best blessing that I didn't know that I was getting was staying in Idaho most of the time. I went up once like the second week of the year and then again in February for like 2 games because, Campbell or someone had a little nagging something. So that was the best case scenario for me was staying in one place, getting the net, having that ability with Besco going up for a while to play a lot of games. And at that point I had proven I could do it because as you know in pro hockey is if you prove that or the coach doesn't have trust in you and you show that you might not be able to do it, they're very quick to bring someone else in, especially at the ECHL level. There's always 100 goalies that are playing the SP or don't even have a job at that point that will be dying for those starts. But then my second year, and this is another story of my career, both playing and now coaching, is I've never signed a multi-year contract. Every single year has been 1 year. And so it's just you're living, year to year, and you're trying to find a way to get that next contract. But my second year, I had gone up and down 9 times before Christmas. So that all of a sudden put a whole new spin on, your mental strength, you're trying to figure out the American League level. And I did okay, but I think so much of timing for guys is you never know when you're going to get your opportunity, and you just have to be as ready as you can for when you do get it. Because if I would have gotten the opportunity I got in my second year in year 5, when I had my great season in the ECHL, I feel like I would have been much more prepared and hopefully ran with it. But when I got it, mentally and game wise, I wasn't ready to be a starter. And I had a time where I played, I think, 7 or 8 games in a row in the American League because both Jack Campbell and Chris Millstorp had gotten hurt. And I went 4-4 and just did very average. And they ended up bringing in Alan York on a just like a PTO and ended up keeping him and sending me back to Idaho after a while. But fast forward, when my game and mentally I was more ready in year 5 in pro hockey, I feel like then if I would have gotten the opportunity, I was much more prepared then. But that's the way the game is when I got that opportunity to see if I was an American League starter, I wasn't ready yet. And that was, really the only opportunity other than a couple games here and there that I ever really got to show myself at that level.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, just kind of there's so many goalies out there. There's so many guys that, every year moving on from whether it's, major, junior, college. So like the free agent guys, there's always going to be so many of them. So like the turnover, the options to bring in guys, it's almost like kind of like the deck is kind of stacked against you. If like as you said, like if you had been as ready as you were in year 5 for this opportunity, like who knows where it would have been, or you would have been more prepared for it, which is very true. But positive note of that year, Elite Prospects credits you for it. I'm gonna go with it. You end up winning the Calder Cup, AHL championship there. So
Yep.
that looks good on the resume. And I wanted to ask you, is that kind of the reason, or maybe one of the reasons that you decided to head over to Europe there? You went over to Fehevar there in the top Austrian league. Obviously they're in Hungary, but like just kind of cashing in while the iron's hot, champion coming off the blocks there.
Yeah, and again, like the story of that first half of the year was Jack Campbell and Chris Nilstorp, who have both had amazing careers. And if you look back at Chris Nilstorp's career, I believe he won 6 championships over like 18 years. He played in, and he's another late developer. I think he played in the Allsvenskan until he was like 24, 25, then went into the SHL, ended up winning, and then came over to North America, won a championship, went back overseas, won another SHL championship, I think his first year. So he won back to back because he was the starter over Jack that season in Texas. And then I think he won another one in Denmark right at the end of his career before he retired. And now he's the goaltending coach in Malmo. And he and I actually keep in touch quite a bit. Where especially during the season, we chat almost on a weekly, every other week basis. And it's pretty cool that I had that opportunity. I was up a lot with that team, ended up playing whatever 16, 18 games, whatever it says on there. And then went down for playoffs in Idaho. We lost in the second round. And the cool thing in that one, I know this one doesn't show up, but I am very proud of this, is we had the longest game in ECHL history. We ended up winning it. It was versus Colorado in the first round. The game started at 7:30. We won in the fourth overtime at 1:19 a.m. So I ended up having it was, what is it, 68 shots against, which I tied the saves record with a good friend, Brian Eklund, who's the development goalie coach with the Devils. So he and I have a laugh about that we're tied for the most saves in ECHL history. And yeah, so it was pretty cool that to be a part of a game like that, and still to this day I can't remember a single aspect of that game until we won it. It was just one of those moments where you're so dialed in, and
Yeah.
you're so busy that it ended up, luckily we ended up winning it, and we didn't have to play the next night for game 7.
That's normally how it is, man. All those like you talk to anyone like, hey, what do you remember about this, winning this or whatever? And a lot of them are like, man, I don't really remember it because you're just like so in the moment, or like, what do you remember about this performance? Well, I was just so focused that you kind of forget it a bit. You're just living it as you go. But yeah, as I said, you end up making the jump over to Europe there. Obviously Europe is different kind of hockey to North America in terms of whether it's the size of the rink, league you're playing in, type of hockey, play style, stuff like that. Like, how was your adjustment to like Hungary there your first year?
uh Again, I struggled, and hence the reason why I ended up being replaced there. It I don't necessarily know if my game wasn't ready. I believe that I had the ability to play at that level, but I didn't necessarily figure it out mentally until it was too late. I had a decent record. I think I was just slightly over 500, but my numbers weren't good. We were just an average team, and as you know, in that league, when you go to play, at the time, Vienna was a powerhouse. Salzburg has always been a powerhouse. Some of these teams is, if I was really good, we had a chance. But if I was off, it was 5, 6, 7 goals against every single night. So it was just very up and down. I never really, I had the ability, or I was given the starting job, but I never really grasped it and ran with it. And then sure enough, in January, they brought in the goaltender coming out of, I think he was coming out of the Allsvenskan at the time. And then I waited around for a month trying to get the net back and just practicing every day. And I wasn't even able to dress because of the import rule. And then Kansas City traded for my rights in the ECHL, and I ended up going back there.
Which I mean, sometimes happens. Like, I myself, my second year in Germany, that was kind of the same thing. Like, I wasn't getting the job done at one point, and like started to play better near the end of my tenure there. But that by then it was kind of just too late, and they ended up kind of releasing me. But I'm happy to see that you obviously got back on your feet right away. Kansas City traded for your rights. You go back to the ECHL there, which brings me to the next season, which you brought up before. I believe this is year 5 of your pro career, maybe year 4, but it's great year for you, man. I mean, 32 games in the coast of 1.8 goals against, 931, some AHL games as well, and most importantly, some hardware there. You end up winning ECHL Goalie of the Year. Did anything click differently that year? Was there something you did different in the summer that kind of prepared you for that year, or was just kind of what we talked about before when for all of these past years, you're kind of learning how to be both training wise on and off the ice, mentally, all that stuff. It just all came together and clicked for this season.
It was two things. And when you go back to my senior year of college, that summer, I went into the summer so determined that I was going to put everything into it to make sure I had a good senior year. And the same thing happened here because I got knocked down in Europe. I went back to Kansas City, played a couple games. We weren't very good. My season was over way earlier than I wanted it to be. I was, angry at myself for the year I had. So I just poured everything I had into it in the summertime, really made sure that when training camp started the next year, because it was going to be my first year on just an ECHL deal, that I was going to be good. And just the way the cards fell, I feel like there was just enough kind of pokes at me during the summertime. Is the coach at the time offered me slightly more money than I ended up signing for. I was over in Europe actually training with Valley, so I couldn't return him the contract until the time change. And when I tried to return it to him, I was like, "Oh, sorry, we signed another guy. I can't give you that anymore." And the ECHL, it's like difference of like $50 or $100 a week, but it was a little poke at me. I'm like, "All right, screw you. I'm going to show you that I'm better than this." And then they end up signing Parker Milner to an AHL contract with Bridgeport, who is our affiliate. So I'm like, all right, now I have to go beat Parker. And then to start a training camp, they brought in a guy named Jason Mission, who you might know, big guy.
Peter Real Pete.
Yep. And and I saw that, and what ended up happening that year is I wasn't invited to Bridgeport training camp, but Parker and Jason Mission were. And 2 days before training or before AHL camp start, I got a call from my agent saying that Mackenzie Skapski was still hurt in Hartford. So he was coming off his big hip surgeries those years. They had thought he would be ready for training camp, ended up needing a guy really, really late. That's not our affiliate. They're a Greenville affiliate. So he just said, "Hey, you're probably not going to play any games, but you can go there for whatever the 4 or 5 days and show what you have." So I was pissed off that I didn't get invited to Bridgeport camp. So I'm like, absolutely, I'm going to go to Hartford camp because we played them in preseason that year. And ended up the best testing scores of my life. Had 19 pull-ups in fitness testing there, which I'm proud of for myself. That was, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just kind of one of those moments that you get up there and like, wow, like I'm stronger than you think I am right now. So it showed, and you get that little bit of boost in confidence that, hey, I'm ready for this. Ended up being, the best goalie or the second best goalie in camp. Magnus Hellberg was there with me. He's an unbelievable goalie, and we've kept in touch just a little bit over the years. And it was one of those moments that I can play at this level. Now I'm ready. And they played me against Bridgeport. So all the guys from Kansas City are on that team. And I played the second half, and we ended up winning 3-2 in overtime over Parker Milner at the other end. And that was kind of like, all right, screw you guys. I'm going to be ready for this. And kind of for me, sticking it to Kansas City a little bit. Ended up going back there. And again, Parker Milner gets the game 1 start. Game 2, we end up starting the season up in Alaska and shutout game 1. for a shutout for myself in my first start of game 2. Parker lost the night before. Go back the next night and had a shutout until about 40 seconds to go in the game, and we ended up winning. It was 2 or 3-1. So basically back to back really good performances. And then I just kind of really every time I went in there, I was trying to stick it to people like, no, I can play at this level. And I had that little bit of push from Parker, who's a great guy, and he was also having a. You look at his numbers, and his numbers are unreal that year too. So it was really the perfect situation of the team was really good. We played a structure and a system that will allow the goalies to do well. You had to go make 1, 2, 3 big saves, but we played very tight. And then I had that fire to me that I was really ready to, show people that I can play, and that, this is my year. And it just kind of, I didn't even know I was close to some of the records that I ended up setting that year in terms of wins in a row and stuff until I was like 1 or 2 away, and it just kind of went.
Probably better you didn't know, because then you're not thinking about
Yes,
it. You know what I mean?
exactly. Yeah.
No, I just saw too, like just looking at your record, I think you had, if you want to count the OT loss, you had 3 losses that whole season, which is insane. Um, but no, that's like, again, this kind of that competitiveness, that prove people wrong mentality. Funny that you end up winning your exhibition game against them there. That's always nice. And Parker Milner, I remember him. Like, I believe he was brought Boston College guy, if I remember correctly. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
I remember him from those days. But it's amazing how many goalies you cross paths with. Like Mission, that's hilarious. That guy was like 6'9". I remember him playing at Peterborough. He was my draft year, so I'm from Peterborough, and I was hoping when I would to get drafted there, but obviously, he was a safer bet. And then another guy I just saw you played with, which is hilarious, is like I can't remember how to say his first name, but Willie, like Stephen Williams, Stephen Williams, or whatever, the
Yes.
goalie.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he was in,
Stefan
I worked
Williams.
with him in Beta kind of my first year
Yep.
after retiring. So um it's funny how the world is over there, man. That
Yeah.
the East Coast AHL, like pro world, like I mean, as there's so much turnover, you just see so many
You end
guys,
up
meet so
knowing
many guys.
everyone. Yes, and actually funny because Stefan, his wife and mine are still close.
Oh,
So
okay.
him and I haven't caught up in a while, but I hear every so often that my wife is texting her. So
Yeah.
they hit it off that year, even more than him and I did.
Well, that's good, Obviously, the girlfriends' wives, they have to be happy too. Things have to work for them because obviously they're along for the journey and supporting, you on your dream, which is very important. So after this year, you end up having that really great season, as we mentioned, goalie of the year. You head back over again to Europe. We just missed each other. I was the year that you had this ECHL year. I was in Norway playing in this league against Stjernen, but you end up signing with Stjernen. I noticed you only played 3 games. Obviously, there's probably a story behind that, a reason, but I just wanted to kind of ask you, like, how was your brief experience there in Norway? Because, like, I found it's a very beautiful country. Like, they speak better English than we do, which is insane. But obviously, it's very expensive. And then I don't know if you were there in the winter, probably not, but it obviously gets very, very cold there in the winter. But like, how was your brief time there in Shannon?
Yeah, no, I like the league. I like the country. It just wasn't the right situation for me and my wife. We didn't have any kids at the time, but just the off the ice aspect, the way the team was run. I I have always, because of the way I am, and I struggle, and I know I struggle with the first time in Fehérvár, was I struggle when I don't feel like it's as professional as it can be, or when people don't put everything they can into their jobs. And it's not just the fact that they're just lazy, but it's just, and that's not what I'm saying at all, but just like, I know when I do something, I'm going to do it as professionally and as perfectly as I possibly can. So I struggled I struggle in places when the locker room's a mess and you can just tell people just don't care. And it, overall, I was just like, I knew after a while, this just isn't the place for me, and I just decided to head back to Kansas City and go play. And the timing worked out where I never even missed the start of training camp in Kansas City. I just kind of figured out pretty quickly that I wanted to head back and this wasn't the right fit for me. And then I went, basically flew back and jumped right into training camp in the ECHL.
No, man, I 100% like know what you're talking about. Like when I played in Mangalore, like kind of a lower budget team, like call it what it was. That's basically a lot of the teams I played for because they were the only ones willing to give me a chance just because of my resume and stuff. And like as you said, it's nothing against these organizations. It's just more like, these people, they would work a full job. They would work, whether it's 8 to 5, and then the GM would be showing up to be the GM of the hockey team the rest of the day. You know what I mean? Or like the trainers would show up after working all day on construction and then have to do like the laundry, get their dressing room ready, kind of things like that too. So like a lot of those teams over there, it's like their second job, and in a perfect world, they would do that as a full-time job, but there's not the money for it. Like obviously it's very expensive over there, as I said. So I can understand like where you're coming from with that. And for some people, like that's obviously very important and helps you feel like, you're going to be able to give your best every day when, they're doing their best with their job as well. So I understand that. So as you mentioned, I'm going back to the ECHL for that season. And then, you end up playing, I believe it's 38 games that year. And then after that, you might have played 1 or 2 games. And then, we all come to this point in our lives where, whether it's for age, health, job opportunity, whatever, family reasons, we got to retire. We got to move on from the playing side of it. But kind of what led you to your decision to retire from playing? And then did you always know like, yeah, my next career path or my life after hockey will still be involved in hockey?
No. For a long time, I didn't think I wanted to get into coaching. And even, right before I got into it that year, my last year playing, which is that year in Kansas City, and that actually last game played in Florida is actually a game played out of retirement because I was coaching that season the full year, which is another, funny story. But uh, I didn't really know. I wanted to stay in hockey somehow, as we all run into at a certain point. You're just kind of like, I know I'm probably done playing hockey after this year, but I don't really have a clear path of what I want to do. And I cold called Brad Ralph, who was my coach in Idaho for 2 years, and he was in his first year in Florida down here. And I was just like, hey, I'm thinking about retiring this summer. Like, do you want to have a goalie coach next year? And he said yes. But he said like yes, but you have to do the video as well, because that's how we can structure enough money to pay you something where you can move, you and your wife down here and actually have a little bit of a budget coming in. So I said yes. We moved down here to South Florida, and I just kind of dove into figuring out, how I was going to coach and what I believed in. And it's totally different. You know what I mean? And so many guys you see, like you've played the position for a long time, you've worked with X amount of coaches, but now when you're the one standing there, and I had Marty Ouellette and Callum Booth my first year in Florida, now I'm the one teaching them, and I had been playing against Marty Ouellette, the year before, and I think he's maybe 1 year younger than me, which actually hasn't been far too uncommon for me because I'm 34 right now. So even this season is I always have a guy who, is right around the same age as me or 1 year younger every year the way up. So it forces you to learn quickly. And, I was lucky to be in Florida for 4 years, and, every year, both as a player and as a goalie and a coach, is you feel like you have kind of those moments like, oh, now you kind of understand a little bit more, and you figure out your own identity, and you figure out how you coach, and you learn as you go. And I know today, 8+ years into coaching, I'm a way better goalie coach than I was in year one. But I had the opportunity again to learn and be able to jump right into pro hockey, and Ralphie was great for me, and he was, patient and let me figure it out. And still to this day, I still do the video side of things. So him saying that I had to do that was the best blessing in disguise that I've ever gotten, because it opens up so many doors. And really, throughout all of Europe, the goalie guy is almost always the video guy as well. I know you guys in Mannheim and Berlin and a couple select teams have the budget to have separate people, but almost everywhere else you're dual rolled. So that has allowed me to become so much of a better coach and not just a goalie guy, because I have to look at the game from the other standpoint and do all the video stuff.
100%. That's kind of how I got my start too. When I retired, I got the job in Bietigheim as a goalie coach, and the first thing they said to me was, "Can you do the video as well?" So like immediately it was I learning on the fly, cutting the game live and all that. But it's true, like what you said, it adds something else to your resume, adds something else to your toolbox. And in Europe especially, a lot of guys will get jobs over, if there's a better goalie coach out there, but there's a guy who's doing both, they'll give it to him because they're trying to, get two guy or get a guy who can do two things at once. Obviously, as you mentioned, budgets everywhere aren't always the same. So it's definitely probably opened a lot of doors for you. Obviously, I think that's a big reason why you came over here. The one thing I wanted to say to you before we kind of start talking about Europe is, do you not wish that you, like, now being on the other side of it, like goalie coaching, do you not wish you could have had like a year or two as a goalie coach and then gone back to playing? Because like how much more do you feel like we learn? Like I was the same way. I felt like, oh my God, if I had known this or saw it this way when I played, now seeing it from this side, I would have been so much better, or like this would have improved this in my game. Like, do you feel the same with what I'm saying?
Yes. And during one of my camps this year, I started talking about this, and it's like I when the goalie plays it, he lives the game once, and then sometimes, not always, because you don't always get to watch yourself on video, you live that game again twice when you watch it on video. And I now, the way I structure is I live every game four times. I watch it live while tagging, and the way I structure it for myself is when I'm tagging the game and in game, I'm not looking at it from a goalie coach perspective. I'm a coach for the team. And that's something I really do pride myself on, is I try to be as good of a video coach as I am a goalie coach. So that means also taking my goalie coach hat off and just like, okay, this is for the team. You're obviously, I'm watching my goaltender and I'm, thinking about things we're going to talk about after the game, but I'm trying to live that moment from the team structure, the systems, what's happening. I have the radio if in case they, need to ask me a question, or when we go in between periods, is I'm a team assistant coach at this moment. And then after the game is over, and I have kind of two different analytic systems that I use. One is a shot quality. So if you're familiar with Steve Alaquette and ClearSight Analytics at all, I use his numbers adapted just a little bit in terms of what was the shot quality. It gives us an expected for and against, and really focusing on the actual shot. And then last season, I wanted to start looking at how does the puck get there. So I kind of developed my own little pattern of play project. So now I looked at four areas. We have the rush, we have in zone, we have our net play, post play. So that's really for me, bottom of the circles down, and then the PK. So for the last 10 games of the season, I just tried to figure out how can I categorize these into certain areas that I can track, just in terms of like shots against and goals against, of seeing where are these patterns happening the most and where are we giving them up. I don't have any sort of like expected or, process to that other side yet, but really seeing off the rush, these are the most common themes. And now how can we train these patterns? Because it's one thing that the shot has a screen or has a tip, but I feel like so much more important to us of how we train is how does this puck get there? What are we doing to get ourselves there and get set? And then how can we actively train that? So that, kind of opens up that whole new wormhole over the last couple of years of how I've really adapted my drills to now really focusing on the patterns and allowing my goaltender to play the way they do and what their strengths are, but then aid their ability to recognize and train these patterns. So when they see it in the game, they know in their subconscious mind, because obviously you don't want to think about it, because that's the worst thing you can do during a game is think about things. But they've seen it before in practice in our goalie sessions, and they have done this response. So just simulate a guy skating down the wing. He passes it across the top of the circles or a face-off dot area and to a guy on the far side. So that slot line Royal Road pass, but we've seen it, we've trained it, and hopefully that allows him to have a better response and read that play more accurately in the game. So that's the other side of it. And then that's a really long answer, but I do my analytics. Then I go through and break down the clips that I want to show to the goaltender. And it's not always every single one. I kind of, just depending on the part of the season, sometimes I go everything, sometimes I just show a couple. I mix it up just to also not make it a stale. I know we're going to sit here and go over 50 clips with my goalies. I try to mix it up, and then I do the video with the goaltender. So really, I'm team game, analytic game, my breakdown for the goalie, and then doing it with the goalie. So I kind of live that game 4 times for every one game that we play.
You're definitely gonna be really prepared when you have to speak to Michael Bitzer every time about this, because he's a big video guy, loves to talk about hockey. So I'm sure he'll love that. But that was that's a really cool way of like preparing yourself, I would say. Like when I've talked to other goalie coaches, like everyone has their own method, but you like watching it 4 times, like especially I really found it fascinating, like the analytical part, like how you've like found your own way to categorize, made into those 4 categories of like, whether it's like how the play gets to the net kind of thing. Like that's because that's always sometimes forgot about. Like a lot of people are just like, oh, like the shot from the slot, was it a grade A? Was it a grade B? Was it a grade D? But it's not also like about, hey, how did we get there? Was this an ongoing play for a minute? Was it a rush? Was it a turnover on a breakout, like kind of thing? So that's kind of cool that you're doing that. I'm excited to see, maybe one day down the road we'll see, something online about you, maybe a system or something with your own system. That'd be cool. But we got about 10 minutes here because you got to run. You got a meeting there. So I want to talk quickly, just a couple things. How did you um, transition yourself now, obviously in coaching? How did you like kind of open yourself up to coming over to Europe? Like obviously you've been in Germany here the past couple of years. I know you started in Frankfurt, um, working with Hildebrand there. And then now you're going to Schwenningen next year. So you got Bitsy, as I mentioned, and then also Eriksson there in net, good Swede goalie. So how did you kind of like open yourself up to these opportunities? Like, did you have an agent look for you? Like, were you always looking to go back over, or was just kind of like random opportunity that came and you took it?
No, Jake Hildebrand, I really have to credit with it. He and I have now repaid each other. And I know Hildy will be okay with me telling this story. The year in Florida that I had Hildy was the year that coming off COVID, where all the teams in the NHL signed a practice taxi squad goalie. So we started our season in Florida, and Cam Johnson, who's still here now, he signed 7 games in the season. He signed an NHL contract with Columbus and then left us for the season. So we had Devin Cooley, was our other goaltender, who actually, got his first NHL games last year and did really well for himself in San Jose and now signed in Calgary. We had him under NHL contract with Nashville. And then we were tasked with 7 games into the season when only, I want to say in the ECHL, it was between 15 to 20 of like the 28 teams were playing. There are teams that weren't playing that season. The OHL didn't play at all that season. It was a mess. And in that year, as affected so many guys in different ways. But by lucky circumstances, Kalamazoo wasn't playing. So Jake Hildebrand, who had been there for a few years, was sitting at home, not playing. And I gave Phil Lasser a call on the way to a game in Orlando and said, hey, this is his last game with us. He's flying out tomorrow. Who do you know that isn't playing right now that can come in and, be a 1A, 1B? Because Devin Cooley was in his first year in the ECHL, and we wanted to bring in a guy who could play, not just sit behind a rookie, and you never know what happens. And Cooley ended up doing really well that year. But the only name he gave me was Jake Hildebrand. And I knew Jake a little bit. Again, he had come into Sioux City closely after I left there, ended up going to Michigan State. I had played against him for 1 year in the ECHL when he went to Allen. I gave him a call and he's like, yeah, I'm actually out in Pittsburgh right now. He was driving to, I think he was running a camp. And it's like, I can't be there this weekend because I have this camp I'm committed to running and I'll lose a ton of money if I can't run my camp. And so we're like, yeah, that's fine. We'll get through the weekend with an e-bug. And he drove down the next week and he ended up being goalie of the year for us that year in Florida. But what I just didn't necessarily say was he was a couple days away from actually taking a job to retire from hockey. And now he just won a championship in Berlin. So he goes from being done, he had just done a job interview, and he's like, yeah, I'm probably not going to find anything this year in the coast. I'm just going to get into the real world, to goalie of the year in the ECHL, to coming to Frankfurt in the second league, winning a championship to bring that club up to the DEL. And then they had a young Finnish goalie coach who left to go back to the juniors in Finland. And they asked Jake who he wanted his goalie coach to be, and he said me. And that is why I'm over in Germany right now. So I gave Hildy a second chance in his career, and Hildy opened up the door to myself coming over to Germany.
That was a great story there. Gotta love that. You know, paying it forward, paying it back, whatever you want to call it. Man, he's another guy that like he's undersized, like we'll just say what it is. Like he's not one of those tall goalies, and you know, just a guy like if you met him, you would think he does not care. Like he's so laid back, he's just so like mellow, but like put the guy in the net, he's gonna stop pucks. Like you like as you mentioned, like he won in Frankfurt to send them up, had a good year the first year in the DL, then last year wins with Berlin. And kind of like also a late developer because if you look at his career, um, you know, like he was kind of doing the East Coast grind there, and then as you said, was about to retire, and then all of a sudden within 4 years, he's got a goalie of the year and two championships. You know, which is it's just crazy how it changes. But obviously, you know, I'm sure he would credit it all to you, the goalie coach he had that gave him that chance, and obviously worked with him every day. But we'll have to have
He
him
gives me
on.
too. Yes, you should, and I'll give you his number as soon as we get off here. But he gives me too much credit. But we did two things. His superpower is his mind, and above and beyond anyone I've ever worked with is he and I can go over video, and without ever doing it on the ice, he can go apply it on the ice immediately. And we looked at, I remember this first game. I wish I could find this goal because I don't have, if you have Instat, go look at the first goal against that he gave up in Florida. I hope it's still on there because it's not on sports contracts. I went to try to find it one day. It
Mhm.
was a 2-on-1 at the blue line, a pass from basically the blue line angle right along the wall to dead center, maybe 1 foot inside the blue line. Jake was probably touching the bottom of the circle, had so much flow to his game that the guy one timed it right on the ice into the middle of the net, and he wasn't anywhere near coming to it, like getting to it. And I sat him down. I'm like, Jake, this isn't going to work. Like the way you're playing right now is just we gotta change some things. We narrowed his feet up. His feet were super, super wide. He was really aggressive, low, flowy, which, as you know, notching him now is the exact opposite. He has amazing structure, but he reads the game at an incredibly high level. So we brought his feet underneath him. We backed him up just right at the edge of the crease and allowed his game reading and mind to help him rather than bail him out of situations. And that was really, if you just look at one thing, it was his feet and his depth, and he did everything else. And he still sticks to that structure today. And that's like the foundation of what he does is that narrow feet game.
I've met him a couple times, like briefly just talked to him, but I like he's one of those guys, like I don't know why, like the pregame routine that they do on the ice, like during warm up, like I always watched him because his is so fascinating, like how he's like working on his skating and like just the movements he's doing and how smooth they look. Like I noticed that when I saw him in the Dell too, and then obviously every year now I when we play wherever he is, I watch him because it's always the same. It's always so smooth as you said, like that feet movement, the tightness kind of thing. So um
He he changed the way I coach because he wanted to do more and more and more skating. And all those little C cuts and different things that he does. He showed me all that. It's like, hey, I think it was Jeff Saleko, who was the goalie coach in Detroit at the time, was big in all those old school,
Mhm.
movements. And still to this day, I incorporate those almost every single day. And I know there's some stuff that came out on Bobrovsky on some similar stuff, but yeah, he skates and he skates and he skates and he would be perfectly happy doing 25 minutes of skating and then jumping into goalie drills because it's such a firm belief in the core to the way he plays.
Whatever that rule is, 10,000 hours to become a master, he'd be up there in the in the skating. Okay, 3 minutes here because you got to get off this call. But last one for you, I'm gonna bunch two in. first, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And last one, what is one piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice you would give either your younger self or maybe give the younger generation out there?
5 years, I don't know. And that's a tough one for me because I've turned down a couple opportunities to come back to North America now. And I'm really happy. And the reason, partially I love Germany is I have a young family with 3 kids, and the travel and being around my kids aspect is important to me and important to my wife to have their dad around. So I as of right now, I'm really happy coaching in Europe. And not to say that I don't want to or I won't jump back to North America for the right opportunity, but I think there's a lot of benefits to the 52 games and the easier travel to be around my young family, versus the American League and NHL grind where you're gone a ton. So that I want to be coaching at the highest level that I possibly can, that also makes sense with where my family is at. And then I guess the one piece of advice would be to make sure that you make the most of every opportunity. And when you are done playing hockey, can you look back and say you don't have any regrets? Because I can 100% say from my playing career that, yep, when I hung up the pads and started coaching, I had given it everything I possibly had. I ended up being an ECHL goalie who had a little, cup of coffee in the American League, and that was great. And that was, maybe I could have turned it into more, but to me, like, I kind of reached my potential. But now when I transition into coaching, now I'm going to give it everything I possibly have to see where I can go. And when eventually I get out of hockey, I can say, hey, I made it to the DEL. If I end up making the American League, NHL, coaching in France, wherever that ends up being, that I gave it everything I have. And, I did it on my terms and made sure I did it every single day and put everything I had into it.
That's good that you can say that because obviously a lot of people, have a regret or wish they did something differently. But I'm happy for you that you can say that, especially about your playing career, that, you have zero regrets, man, because that's obviously I think a big weight off a lot of people's shoulders, regretting something or wishing they did something differently. So I'm happy you got that. Appreciate you taking the time to do this. You got to jump on another call right now. We actually didn't even get into like the goalie school stuff while you're working in the summer, you're mentoring. I guess that'll have to be episode 2,
Part
part
two.
2. But no, I appreciate it, man. I'm looking forward to seeing you this year in Schwenningen. We open up against you at home against you
Yes.
guys, and yeah, it'll be nice to actually know each other now. We can actually talk in the hallways. But again, thanks for doing this. Really good to hear your story again. I'm sure it was fun for you going down memory lane again.
Yes, absolutely. Appreciate having me on, and let's do it in person sometime this season. So
Yeah,
when
I
you
got
guys
it.
are,
I got this stuff. We'll do it. We'll do it in
yep,
person for sure. Part
perfect.
2.
Yeah,
Yeah, for those listening, I'll put all his socials in here. I'm also going to link the goalie school once this episode comes out. Until next week, cheers and ciao.